Okay, today everyone, this video is really going to focus on reinforcing what the concept of deviance is, the fact that it is a relative concept, before we really discuss different theories of deviance and its benefits for society. You now know what you could hopefully be able to define what deviance actually is. You can, you know why it's actually a relative concept, but what we want to cover in today's video and really focus upon for the next class is you're being able to apply what these definitions of deviance and the fact that it's a relative concept. So looking at what is deviant behaviour, why is behaviour deviant, what the norms are, what is a norm, what are the values, and we go take a step back and look at some other behaviour and terms for certain types of behaviour. We also quickly look at the relationship between norms and, deviance and crime. And we'll also quickly go over how deviance and therefore what is normal has actually changed over time, and it can change across cultures as well. So like I said, hopefully you've already got an understanding of what deviance is, the fact, and you know that it is a relative concept. In this video I'll go over in a bit more detail why it is a relative concept, so it'll give us enable us on the next class to really have a look at or apply or see examples of things like tattooing, smoking, drugs, that type of thing. What are norms, what is normal behaviour, and therefore what is deviance. So anyway, let's get into it. Okay, so as you know, the concept of deviance is in opposition to conformity. It's a neutral deviance is in opposition to conformity. Deviance, it's a neutral concept, there is no judgment, but deviancy promotes disorder. Remember, all society is really about order, social cohesion, functionalism in particular, wants society to carry on in the status quo. Any deviant behaviour, be it positive or negative, is going to challenge that. Remember, we only consider behaviour to be positive or negative in hindsight upon reflection. So you think about examples that I've mentioned passing in class, like Rosa Parks sitting at the front of the bus, where African American people were not expected to sit. That was very much deviant behaviour, and that challenged the status quo. So that was deviant behaviour in its most one of the better examples of it. We look back and see it as an act of bravery, heroism, whatever you want to call it. But at the time, it was incredibly deviant because it challenged social cohesion, challenged the status quo. But in hindsight, it was a very important act in the American Civil Rights Movement. So functionalism in particular, but conformity is really associated with compliance with rules and uniformity. If everyone complies with the rules, it makes life a lot easier for some. It doesn't actually make it right necessarily, but if everyone knows the norms and complies with either the social norms or the laws, then society is a lot more straightforward. Deviancy does include times when norms are violated causing injury, but it also when norms are transgressed in the fight against injustice or the introduction of social change. Rosa Parks is a great example of that. Sit-ins are a great example. Gandhi, looking for or trying to fight against injustice, that's still deviant behaviour. So that's where we really just need to get discussing positive deviant behaviour, and that's something we'll look at later on in this area of study. So, minor deviations or deviance can result in some form of ostracism. Ostracism, basically, you're being made to be an outsider, you're an outcast in a particular group, society, whatever it might be. You fart on a public transport system, you're ostracised, people will move away from you. You continually participate in deviant behaviour, antisocial behaviour, whatever you want to call it, you're going to be ostracised by your peer group, and to the point where you won't have friends, essentially. More serious deviance can result in death, be that in some countries of the world, obviously through crime, punishment, you're going to be sentenced to death, but it also can result in your own accidental death as well, depending upon what actions you're actually taking. Remember, sociologists do not make a judgment about the behaviour, only that it violates social norms. So we identify the behaviour, but we don't actually make a judgment to say it's right or wrong, and saying that a particular group, society, has its norms violated, therefore its norms are based upon values, therefore the sociologist could identify the fact that it actually violates that behaviour, but it's not making a judgment whether it's good or bad, right or wrong. That really can only be done by either the social group itself or, upon reflection, months, years, decades down the track that was actually positive or negative. The response to the behaviour is important. So the deviant behaviour, do the norms actually change as a result of the deviant behaviour, because people accept that actually should be norm, or it's highlighted injustice, whatever it might be, or do they actually consolidate or reinforce the norms by punishing that particular person who has participated in deviant behaviour? So that's really the two responses, I suppose. Either the norms change, or you actually punish or ostracise the deviant behaviour, the person who is participating in that deviant behaviour, so they therefore conform in the future. It can include thoughts, feelings, beliefs and conditions as well. Behaviour is really what we look at, because that is, I suppose, the outward expression of deviance, but it can actually include thoughts, feelings, beliefs and conditions. Emil Durkheim, we'll discuss in a lot of detail next week. He realised that deviance was both positive and negative, and could have both a positive and negative effect upon society. It made moral boundaries of social behaviour explicit. So if we can identify behaviour as deviant, it really reinforces what the boundaries are of what's appropriate or not. Like jokes. Jokes can be in bad taste. But if someone goes too far, these days it makes a racist joke or a sexist joke, most societies these days would consider that to be outside the boundaries of good taste or our morals. Therefore, the person who's making that particular joke will actually have some form of informal punishment. They're not going to jail most of the time, but there will be informal punishment, saying they'll be told off, lose friends, be asked to leave an establishment if it might be in a private sort of setting, a club or a restaurant, whatever it might actually be. But that punishment of the behaviour, that I suppose reinforcing of a moral boundary can actually be really good, because then it unites the rest of us to actually saying, yeah, we all agree, good, we're actually in agreement, we're in a good society, we realise where the boundary is between good and bad, funny and tasteless sort of jokes. So deviancy can help reinforce those boundaries, which is actually really good for society, despite the fact that it was actually negative deviancy or negative behaviour. So individuals also you got immediate feedback. If someone reinforces your behaviour by saying, hey mate, that's not on, or no, we don't do that sort of thing here, then you know whether you've behaved appropriately or not. It reinforces that boundary, what is acceptable, what is not. So we need to test that. If no one's ever punished, if everyone conforms, we don't know where the boundaries actually are. So deviance can be fine or helpful, because it actually reinforces those boundaries for everyone. We've discussed norm and values. Deviancy is linked to normal behaviour. So it can be defined as social behaviour assumed to be performed by the majority of individuals. Remember, not everyone's going to comply with the majority. So most people know what norms are, either explicitly or implicitly. So therefore, normal behaviour is what the majority of us do. And any departure from normal behaviour or any transgression of social norms can be defined as deviancy, either good, bad. Again, upon reflection, we can only really discover whether the behaviour is considered deviant or not. Accepted behaviour is every aspect of our social life. Sitting on the bus, where do you sit? Where do you sit in class? Do you say hello? Do you shake hands? Do you hug? Do you kiss? Do you whatever it might be? These are different social norms. Norms within a household, norms within a school setting, norms within a business or workplace. Every aspect of your social life, when you're interacting, there are norms that are accepted behaviours which you expect to comply with as a member of that group or society. Make it simple, and it also makes it simple to identify acceptable and unacceptable behaviour. It makes things predictable. You know what to expect because people are taught norms, either through observation or direct instruction, so you know what's actually predictable. You know how you're supposed to behave, therefore you know how others are going to behave. Predictability really enforces social cohesion and stability. We want order, we want this, because everyone can live their life a lot easier if there is social cohesion and stability, so that's why we want things to be predictable. We know what we're going to get in a given situation. Relative to time and place, because they change over time. How you greet people, very formal. How you dress, how you behave in certain situations changes over time, and depending upon where you are in the world, that would also change as well. Common Australian norms: saying thank you, eating with cutlery, not talking with your mouth full of food. These are all norms that the majority of people would practice here in Australia. Values, it's that step back. Subjective evaluations, what's good, bad, right and wrong. Social values give norms of moral justification. So behaviour that is deviant, the norms, if you transgress a norm, because our norms are based upon values, but the values that we hold, which is why we have the norms, if you violate one of those norms, the values give us the right to actually punish you. Now, we value honesty here. You just lied. Honesty is the value that we treasure, possess, promote, so therefore you're going to be punished as a result. So the values that step back, values are why we have the norms. We value honesty, so the norm is not to lie or to answer the question you've been asked, whatever it might be. Emotional strength behind the values varies according to the norm in question. So crossing the street, jaywalking, that's the norm. You don't jaywalk. Why? Well, it's actually because, well, it's safety, that sort of thing. So that sort of norm. Or sorry, yawning. Yawning is a good example. Why do you have the yawning? Oh, we value actually not seeing into someone else's mouth. It's a lack of respect. So therefore, the punishment is actually not going to be quite severe. Whereas murder, obviously, it's illegal. Norm not to kill each other, the value of life, that sort of thing. So you're going to be punished a lot more severely, depending upon the type of norm you've actually violated or the value that's actually been transgressed against. Murder and vandalising a car, different emotive strength behind these two, therefore different punishments as a result. The consequences of murder, assault, or property theft impact on all society, so such behaviour is typically condemned and punished in most societies. As a result, by contrasted with, say, yawning, talking with your mouth full, picking your nose, that type of thing. Serious effect on the unity and harmony of society as a result of the acts, therefore it must be punished more severely. That's why it's different, obviously, levels of again, reinforcing the different levels of emotional strength behind those particular norms and values. Different theorists, Hobbes and Locke, argue that we are willing to give up freedoms to enter into social contracts with governments in exchange for personal protection. Do you agree with that? So we're not allowed to kill people, we're not allowed to enter other people's houses, but the government will enforce things for us. They will protect us from others. We're willing to give stuff up for that to actually happen. So we are willing to give up some of our personal freedom. So we can't do everything we want, but the government protects us in return. Do you agree? Something to think about. Really, we'll run through these. Folkways, this is not really accessible. I'm not going to assess what folkways and mores are, but it's something that's covered in the course, so we need to know it. Folkways are the customs and habits of members of society associated with their ordinary everyday interaction with others. Informal mores, shaking hands when introducing to strangers, covering your mouth when you yawn. Folkways are not enforced, and people who do not adhere to them are rarely punished. So they're not really, like if you don't shake hands with someone, or you don't cover your mouth when you yawn, depending upon where you're not going to get punished. But that's what a folkway is, an informal more. Whereas a more, the moral rules that in society that guide conduct between people in daily personal interactions, picking up after your dog, helping an injured person hit by a car, volunteering as a witness to a crime. So they're more serious. You can see, obviously, therefore, the comparison between that folkways and mores. Folkways not really enforced. These are, oh, come on, mate. Your dog just did a turd. How about you pick it up? Someone hit by a car, volunteer. Those are things, you're expected to do that. Okay. Third one, laws, written norms and rules that are included in the legal code of society. They make laws through Parliament, through representing your electorate. You can actually form pressure groups to influence change as well. But these are the serious stuff. They're so serious, we're going to write them down, and they're enforceable by the government. They provide us with protection. So these are the things that are written down. They are expected to enforce these. Social control, I think we've talked about this, the process by which society manages people who do not behave normally or violate norms. They are used to enforce laws or used to enforce control, but informal means can be equally more effective in enforcing conformity. So you giving that glare to someone who is talking really loudly on their phone on the bus, or who's swearing really loud, that kid on the bus who keeps swearing for no particular reason, you, by saying something, you can enforce social control. You can enforce our norms. So by your behaviour. I know I do on a regular basis. I'll be down at the netball courts, the basketball courts, some kid runs through the game or basketball comes on the court. I'll be the one to say something because I'm enforcing our norms. Hey, this is actually our court. We've paid for this. Kids are playing. How about you go and find somewhere else to play? There's no law. Like kids haven't broken a law by doing that. But it's up to someone to enforce our social norms upon different people. So even if it means, hey mate, would you mind actually not smoking in that area? Or hey, I've got kids here. Whatever it might, can you mind lowering your voice? I'm trying to watch the movie. Whatever it might actually be. So public nudity, it's abnormal. So you get formal punishment for nudity. But if you've got no top on in the middle of, I don't know where it might be, in a cinema or something like that, you get informal punishment. People will look at you if you are dressed inappropriately for a particular time. A woman wearing a bikini, again, at a cinema. It's not against the law, but it would be actually, it's not public nudity, but it's exposure. So it would be informal punishment. So people looking at you, staring at you, making comments, that would be the punishment for it. So formal deviance is referred to as a crime. Crimes controlled using sanctions administered by our criminal justice system, the courts, police, government. Informal deviance is the violation of social norms that have not been codified into the law. So informal deviance, formal deviance, crime, informal deviance, everything else. The classification of crime is based upon established legal criteria, so it has to be passed by law. Obviously, informal deviance is largely based on interpretation of the observer based on their socio-cultural beliefs. What is law changes from country to country and time, as does informal deviance. So formal deviance, crime, informal deviance, everything else. Time and place. If you're in China and you spit, no one really cares. If you spat regularly as you're walking down the street, people would look at you and stare at you. So that would be considered to be informal deviance in Australia, whereas it wouldn't in other parts of the world. So do remember, informal deviance is largely based on the interpretation of the observer, again, because you're talking about you're thinking about the observer's norms, cultural background as well, and their beliefs, values. So that's what informal deviance is largely based upon, and that's why it's a relative concept, because it's based upon what that person thinks is deviant behaviour. So it's relative to that individual, the observer, and also society, but largely the observer who's going to informally punish that particular person who they consider to have participated in formal deviance. So what is deviant? I've gone on about this a lot in terms of what is deviant is different depending on time and place. It's a good example from one of the texts I've got. So they looked at Germany in the 20th century shows that a movement from homosexuality was criminally deviant to legally accepted. So at the beginning of the 20th century, there was a law that punished unnatural vice, they called it, between men with a 1 to 5 years imprisonment. So there was a court case in 1907, a series of court-martial for sodomy, and a rash of associated suicides. Because as you may or may not be aware, sexuality and homosexuality was something that was very much frowned upon for the majority of the 20th century. It goes back, you can look at it as theorist, psychologist, Freud, in terms of whether it was a disease, it was a lifestyle choice, whatever it might be. But in any case, Hitler treated homosexuals as poorly as he treated the Jews. He would send them to concentration camps just like he did Jews and artists and musicians or whatever it might actually be. Homosexuals were ones that in Berlin prior to the 1936 Olympics that actually got banned from Berlin or shipped out of Berlin because he didn't want the world to see homosexuals on his streets. So it wasn't until 1969 that negative perceptions of homosexuality were legally challenged through the abolition of that particular law that I mentioned. Many people in Germany still thought that, and you come to the case of Australia. So same-sex attracted people is no longer considered to be deviant or a crime. It's considered as one of a number of sexual expressions. States and territories have been progressively decriminalising homosexuality since the 70s. Tassie was the final state in which sex between consenting male adults in private was unlawful until the year 2000. Christian churches, as you can imagine, because of their beliefs in a man and a woman, tried to resist these particular changes, but ultimately the actual this is different to same-sex marriage, but the actual sexual activity of two consenting adults it's no longer considered to be a criminal offence if you're in a same-sex relationship or have sex with someone of the same sex as you. The other example can also be seen across cultures. So in Saudi Arabia, it's illegal for females to drive cars, but obviously Western societies, it's very much acceptable. Drinking alcohol in some societies is a crime, whereas in others it's part of social life. So depending upon where you are as well, and culturally, you also, what can be considered deviant in one culture is definitely not deviant in another. So then reinforcing it's relative to the norms or the values of that particular society, which, as we know, certainly does change between depending upon where you live. All right, so that's it. I can't press the escape without finishing the presentation. So what I will do is, oops, I'm trying to get rid of that. It's not going to work. Okay, so that covers an introduction, well, not an introduction, hopefully a reinforcing of what deviance is and the relative nature of it. We're going to be looking at, from your text in particular, tomorrow, we are going to be looking at, I have it written down here, sorry, somewhere, exercise 2.3, 2.4, probably 2.5, we'll work on in class together. I really want you to watch this video once, watch it twice, but I really want you to get into the habit of having the knowledge, or at least the basic understanding of what we're going to be talking about in class by watching this video. So when it comes time to answering those questions or demonstrating that understanding, I'm just there to help you. I'm not there to teach you on what the knowledge is. I'm there to actually clarify your understanding and really help you focus on how you can demonstrate that in writing. As always, any questions, comments, feedback, please drop me a Zuno message, send me an email. Otherwise, I will see you in class. Thanks, guys.